How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Rolling Lines and Apples and Genos production. My name is Josh Hutchinson, and I'll be your host. I have returned after my brief hiatus, and I'm ready to discuss the fantasy hockey season that was and the lessons I learned along the way. Let's go. What's going on, everybody? I'm excited to be here. I'm doing a solo show just to talk about my fantasy season last year. Talk about things that went well, things that didn't. Things I didn't have as many things that went well as I would have hoped. But I'm ready to hash things out here. I would have done this earlier. I was hoping to do this with a co-host. We had someone lined up to co-host to be a full-time co-host. Something came up in his life and he wasn't able to do it. So that's why there's been a little bit of a delay here. So I thought I would get this out. We're getting to the point where the Stanley Cup final is right. We're right in the midst of the Cup final. If I leave it any longer, no one's going to be interested in this at all. You may not be interested in this at all. Anyways, but I'm gonna talk it out anyways. This is therapy for myself. So I was in 10 leagues this year. That is 3 dynasties, 7 redrafts, and then that's not including my Roto and Best Ball leagues. And those leagues are actually the ones that I did the best in, the ones that I could just set and forget. Those were the ones that I did the best in. I was in 4 A&G Best Ball leagues. I did win one of them. I came third in another, and I believe I was top 5 in another. So those went pretty well for me overall. There is also another Roto league that has not been spoken about, but we did a podcast going into the season last year where Nate, Blake, Binksy, and I drafted points only Roto League. And I absolutely destroyed the other 3. It wasn't even close. And I just want to talk about that a little bit because small victories, right? I didn't have many victories this past year, but in the one league where all 4 of us were in it, I absolutely dummied. So I won by almost 100 points. Blake came in second place. He had 1,366 points. I had 1,444. Nate had 1199. Big C 1147. Nate, I think, had a lot of injury issues. But essentially, the crux of it came. I drafted Nikita Kucherov, Nate McKinnon, and Artemi Panarin, and they ended up being 3 out of the top 5 scorers in the league. That was absolutely massive for me. Also got Roman Yossi, who had 85 points for a defenseman, so that doesn't hurt too much either. Braden Point, big for me, 90 points. Kirill Kaprizov, 96 points. Yeah, things just went well for me in this league. So I did want to touch on that because yeah. I think that you need to celebrate the things that went well. So I guess the moral of the story is, baby, I just need to trust my drafting gut and not make as many freaking moves through the year. Don't putter. Don't fuck with shit. Anyways, so let's dive in. We'll dive into some redraft leagues. So we'll start with a keep 3 league that I'm in with some of the other Apples and Genos guys. I guess actually I'm in. The 4 of us are in this league as well. Binksy, Blake, Nate, and I. But so it is a keep 3. It's called we call ourselves experts. We've talked about it on the podcast quite a bit. Scoring very similar to the Cupful. It's a points league. And we've got guys like Raj from Five Hole Fantasy Hockey in there. We've got a few listeners from the Discord. A few. Who else do we have? Devin from Fantasy Hockey Hacks is in there. Uh, Fantasy Hockey Trades. Yeah, there's a number of guys around the fantasy hockey community in there, so it's a pretty competitive league. My keepers this year were Nate McKinnon, Eric Carlson, Dougie Hamilton. Obviously, Eric Carlson had quite a bit of have fell off quite a bit in Pittsburgh this year. Was did not do near as well as expected. Dougie Hamilton was hurt for a large chunk of the season, so that really hurt me as well. But I want to dive into my draft a little bit. So the players that I drafted that ended up returning about what you would expect based on their draft position. I got Kevin Fiala at 58, Victor Hedman at 63, Evgeny Malkin at 82, Matt Zuccarello at 106. Those guys returned me decent value, at least met their draft capital. Now, a couple of value guys that I got were Owen Tippett at 135. He ended up being the 55th ranked skater in the league, and Sergei Bobrovsky at 183. That'll be a trend. I got Bobrovsky in quite a few leagues really late in the draft, and that ended up being huge for me. He was the 4th ranked goalie in this league. In terms of busts, there were quite a few. Jeff Skinner at 68 ended up ranked 168. He had a terrible year, especially the back half. Vince Dunn at 111. He ended up being 168 on average stats. Missed a good chunk of the year as well due to injury. So that hurt me quite a bit. Tony DeAngelo was another guy that I got at 154, thinking that he was going to be a value. Taylor Hall as well at 159. DeAngelo ended up being a healthy scratch for a good chunk of the year, and Taylor Hall obviously was hurt for a large portion of that. And then Darcy Kemper was a goalie that I drafted, luckily later in the draft, but he was not good and lost his job to Charlie Lindgren, and that's been well documented. A couple of key moves I made through the year: added Pavel Buchnevich off of free agency on November 13th. Ended up keeping him the rest of the year. Not sure why he was sitting there. Had a bit of a tough start to the year, I guess. But that ended up being a big pickup for me. Also added Noah Hannafin on November 30th. Ended up keeping him for a good chunk of the year as well. So in this league, some more context. I was leading the league last year. I believe I was first in the league in the regular season. So I sold the farm. I did a whole bunch of pick swaps and tried to upgrade my team to win a chip. Ended up not doing it. Ended up getting third. And yeah, I mean, I paid for it a little bit this year. That being said, I still was top 4 in points for, despite all of this injury adversity, with Dougie Hamilton being hurt and all of these busts that happened through the draft. But I could not buy a win. I was hovering anywhere between 10th and 6th all through the year. And there was a huge logjam in the middle of the standings. And my mindset was just to keep grinding. And if I got in, I'd be able to contend. I ended up being offered a deal to sell near the trade deadline. It was actually by Mark Barber, 18 skaters. And my luck hadn't turned at that point. So I decided to pull the trigger and sell and then still try to compete. So on February 20th, I traded Mark Barber, Owen Tippett, Victor Hedman, Vince Dunn, an 11th round pick and a 12th round pick for Simon Nemec, Matt Roy, Joel Farabee, and a 4th and a 5th. That's going to do me well this year coming up. And then on March 2nd, I also traded Kevin Fiala in a 14th for Max Pacioretty and a 7th. Ended up winning the consolation bracket. I just missed the playoffs in the end. Still almost grinded it out and made it through. But so that a bit of a tough year there. I think there's a lot of positives to be gleaned from that. There was a lot of adversity. Still almost figured it out. But sometimes in a points league, things just aren't going to bounce your way. And in a competitive league like that, I mean, it's tough. It's tough to get an edge over the competition. So I'm not gonna take too much from that league. I think that I'm set up pretty well for this year. Um, let's move on to the Cacupful. I was in tier 5 of the Cacupful this year, and things went fairly well for me for a good chunk of the season. So um, in terms of players in the draft that were worth their draft position, I got Cale Makar at 12. He ended up being the 17th ranked skater, so he was huge, and especially as a defenseman, that's massive. Yeah, he also missed some time, missed a little bit of time as well. So the fact that he was ranked 17th overall is pretty huge as a defenseman. So I still think was a great first round pick. Travis Konechny, I got at 54. He ended up being the 49th ranked skater. And then Zach Werenski, I got him at 59. And if you average stats, so if you get rid of the fact that he was injured, if you average his stats, he was actually 59th. So he returned that draft capital for me. So pretty happy with Zach Werenski at 59. In terms of values, I got Braden Point at 31. He ended up ranked 21st. Sam Reinhart, that was a big move. He got him at 82. He ended up ranked 11th. And Brock Nelson at 138. He ended up ranked 45th at the end of the season. So that was a huge value. I targeted Brock Nelson in a number of spots as a late round center, and he ended up coming up huge for me in some spots. Uh, in terms of busts, I had Alex Ovechkin at 17. He ended up ranked 38th. He kind of turned it on at the end. For a good chunk of the year, he was like hovering around a 100th in the league, which that really hurt for a good chunk of the season. But the fact that Sam Reinhart was just on an absolute bender, that certainly kind of evened things out for me. Troy Terry at 110, he ended up 162nd. He was a big disappointment this year. And then Tristan Jarry, I kind of I got him in the 9th round, which is the earliest I've taken a goalie in years. I looked at the skaters around him, and I felt like he was going to return me the most value. That was a mistake. Pittsburgh ended up being considerably worse than I thought, and Jari ended up losing his job in the end. So that was a really tough look. That did not turn out the way that I expected. So just further proof that I need to be pushing goalies even further. So a few key moves throughout the year. I added Quinton Byfield on November 6th. He ended up 161st in scoring, but he came out pretty big for me in a few different matchups. Connor Ingram, I picked him up on December 29th. He ended up 199th ranked overall, but he had some really hot stretches in goal. Eli Tolvanen, I added him on January 1st. He was the 148th ranked skater. And then Mike Matheson, picked him up on the bye week because I ended up placed first at the end of the season. So I got a bye to the semis. I picked up Mike Matheson off waivers. So I think it was just someone that was desperate for some games played to try and get through to the next week. I ended up reaping the benefits, and I mean, it didn't end up mattering too much in the end. So I was first after the regular season, like I said, got the first round bye, ended up losing in the semis. Alex Ovechkin had the week of his life in the quarterfinals where I wasn't playing, and then the next week did absolutely nothing. So that ended up being really, I mean, being the difference. Um, both uh, both of the teams in the third place game, so me and the guy I was playing in the bronze medal game, would have beat the teams in the championship matchup. The 6th place team ended up winning the whole thing. So this was a really tight division. There was a lot of movement in the standings. I ended up just kind of fortunately staying right at the top for a good chunk of the year, but yeah, ended up not getting it done in the playoffs. I will still be getting promoted, I believe, to tier 4. But a little bit disappointing. I thought I was going to make a bigger jump than that. I didn't make a ton of trades. That's going to be a trend here. Was a little bit hesitant. It's tough. I mean, I'll talk about this a little bit in the end when I wrap up, but when you have so many leagues, it's hard to think about trades. and if you're a guy like me, where you're pretty conservative in terms of dealing players, um, sometimes you wait a little bit too long if you're not committing a ton of brain power to each team. All right, let's move on to the Fantasy Puck Content Creators League. This was the one that Nate won. This is the one we did with the guys from Fantasy Puck. So another league with some familiar faces around the fantasy hockey community. We had Ian Gooding from Dauber, Victor Nuno, and yeah, I did just a number of names that you'll probably recognize. Um, so in terms of players that were worth their draft position, I actually felt like this draft went pretty well for me. Um, so I got Kirill Kaprizov at 9. He ended up ranked 11th. Roman Yossi at 16. He ended up ranked 14th. John Carlson at 40th. He ended up ranked 66th. So not a big drop off there. They had blocks as a pretty heavily weighted stat in this point system. Jacob Chikrin, I got at 81st. He ended up ranked 88th in this scoring format. Malkin at 88th. He ended up ranked 92nd. And then in terms of draft values, got Steven Stamkos at 33rd. He ended up ranked 20th. Carter Verhaeghe at 112. I remember that feeling like that was a crazy number for Carter Verhaeghe. He ended up ranked 54th. That was a pretty big value for me. And then Sergei Bobrovsky, once again, at 153. He ended up ranked 60th. And then in terms of busts, Rupe Hintz, I got him at 57th. He ended up ranked 109th. Alex Tuck at 64. He ended up ranked 93rd. Troy Terry at 129. He ended up ranked 193rd. And Bowen Byram at 136. Another guy that I banked on, luckily late in drafts for the most part. He ended up ranked 327. Byram just didn't get a ton of opportunity this year, and that was disappointing, and didn't do a ton with that opportunity. November 6th, some key moves here. November 6th, I dropped Valery Nichushkin. He was not getting any deployment at that point. Was playing second line, wasn't getting on the power play, wasn't getting a ton of minutes, and I'm just like, oh, they're just not going to use this guy, I guess. Dropped him. He proceeded to go on an absolute bender, ended up 78th in average stats. Obviously missed a ton of time, so it still may have been a bit of a liability on my roster. But, you know, I still think that probably was a mistake. I added Connor Ingram on November 20th and held him for a good chunk of the year. He ended up ranked 152nd. And January 1st, I added Shane Gostisbehere, and he did pretty well for me as well, kind of as the Bowen Byram replacement in terms of defensemen. This was a really tight league. I lost a lot of really tight matchups. It came down to the last week. There were 4 of us in contention for the final playoff spot. And if I had snuck in, I would have lost to Nate in the semis and won the bronze medal game. But ended up winning the consolation bracket instead. Didn't, I believe I won my last matchup, but just due to the results of the other games, didn't end up sneaking in. So another league where I feel like I was right there, and just wasn't able to get it done. These were all very competitive leagues, so tough to make moves, tough to get a leg over the competition. I still think that there were probably areas where I could have improved my team. I didn't have a lot of sell high candidates. That was the other thing. Even the guys that met their draft value, Kirill Kaprizov, he had a tough start to the year, so not a guy that I could have sold high on, and not that I would have wanted to anyways. Yeah, I mean, there just weren't a lot of guys on my team that I could have I could have got great value on, and there really wasn't a lot of movement in this league either. Not a lot of trades being completed, so it's just one of those things. So and then just not a lot of guys available that you could pick up off the waiver wire. There were a lot of guys that were privy to people's people's performances. So that was a tough one. So I think that I'd like another crack at that if the Fantasy Puck boys are willing and want to do this again. I would love another crack at it because I think I could do some damage. In the Apples and Chinos Listener League 2, this is the worst I have ever performed in a fantasy hockey league, and I just want to go through how depressing this roster was in terms of disappointing performances. Okay, so I got Kirill Kaprizov at 10, which in the end wasn't a huge deal. He, like I said, had a slow start and ended up picking it up in the end and looked more like the Kirill Kaprizov that we expect to see. It was more about the rest of my team and his slow start that really killed me and I ended up just being out of contention uh, pretty early in the season. Number 2, I got Tage Thompson. Tough year for Tage Thompson. But we will talk about that a little bit more later. Braden Point at 3, he ended up being pretty good. Alex Tuck at 4. Yeah, really disappointing year for him. Kevin Fiala at 5, he was okay. Zach Wierenski at 6 ended up being hurt for a good chunk of the season. Drake Batherson, he didn't return as much value as I had hoped. Alex Pietrangelo lost power play 1. Brandon Montour was hurt and then didn't convert when he got back. Jake DeBrusk, I ended up dropping him, I believe, just because he was playing third line minutes a good chunk of the year. Trevor Zegras hurt a good chunk of the year. Sean Dursey had a pretty good start, ended up tailing off in the end. Tristan Jarry, my goalie in the 13th round, lost his starting job. Tom Wilson was hurt for a chunk of the year, and Washington was just bad. He didn't end up having a very good season offensively. John Klingberg as one of my defensemen. We all know how that turned out. Freddie Anderson went down with blood clots. Logan Cooley, I tried to get as a sleeper. He ended up not really returning a ton of value. Mason McTavish, I took a swing on him too. He actually had a pretty good start to the year, but really tailed off in the end after his injury. Jordan Eberle and Taylor Radish, I picked those guys up as streamers in the end. But wow, this roster just full of underachievers and slow starters. And it ended up absolutely crushing me in the end. I did end up at a certain there was a point, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks in, where Tage Thompson went down with an injury. It looked serious. And I was like, I cannot afford for one of my top guys to be hurt as I am 0-3 or 0-4 at this point. I need to make a move. I need to be getting points from someone fairly elite. So I traded him for another underachiever in Mika Zibanejad, along with Thomas Chabot, who was coming back from injury. He hadn't played yet that year, but it looked like he was kind of gearing up to return from his injury. That ended up being a decent trade. Mika Zibanejad obviously didn't have the season that we expect from him. Thomas Chabot was okay. Also, really struggled with injury. So it wasn't like a smash home run, but Tage Thompson really underachieved this year, and I think I did end up winning that trade in the end in a redraft league. But it was too little, too late. It was a really tough year. This is another league that was pretty competitive. A lot of really good listeners from the Discord. And yeah, I ended up, I believe in the end, I finished 9th, which, yes, by far my worst performance of all time. Ended up kind of getting checked out at a certain point. I just had too many other leagues and just couldn't afford the bandwidth to try and claw my way back into the playoff race in this league. So yeah, one of the more embarrassing performances of my fantasy hockey career, but we live and learn, and sometimes you just get really fucking unlucky. I like, when I look back at this draft, yes, there are things I could have done different. There were some bad picks, but in terms of projections at the start of the year, I still feel like I executed my plan the way that I had hoped. It's just pretty much everything didn't work out. And that was a huge bummer. It happens. All right. There were a few other leagues. There was the Apple Geno's Patron League. That one I ended up in the console. I think I won the consolation final in that one. Just missed the playoffs, scratching and clawing right till the end. That was my worst performance in that league so far. I was the defending champ and ended up just not doing quite as well, which was disappointing. I won't hash that one out too much. And then there was the five-hole fantasy hockey listener league that I was in. Ended up placing second and finishing second in this one. But I did want to go through my draft here because I feel like it was one of my best. I got Austin Matthews at 5. He ended up ranked 6th. Yossi at 20th. He ended up ranked 8th. Nylander at 29th. He was 25th. Gensel at 44th. He ended up ranked 68th, but that was due to injury. John Carlson at 53rd. He ended up ranked 49th. Philip Forsberg at 68th. He was 5th. Val Nichushkin at 77. Drake Batherson at 92. He ended up 67th. Joel Eriksson Ek at 101. He ended up ranked 28th. Thatcher Demko at 116. He was the 8th overall goalie. Owen Tippett at 125. He ended up ranked 61st. And then Byram at 140. Arturi Lekin and Sam Bennett. Sergei Bobrovsky at 173. He ended up the 7th ranked goalie. Or sorry, the 7th overall player and the 5th ranked goalie. So that was probably my best draft outside of that Roto League that I mentioned at the beginning. And honestly, I was trucking in this league, absolutely dominating for a good chunk of the year. Ended up in first place by a wide margin. Should have made more deals. My playoff schedule was not fantastic with these guys, and should have made a couple deals to maximize games played a little bit more. In the end, ended up losing a really tight matchup that I believe came down to goalie wins. I think I lost by 1 goalie win in the end. Let me just double check that here, but it was it was tight right down to the wire. Yeah, I lost 6-5 in goalie wins. That was really close. Really close in hits as well. Yeah, things just didn't fall the way that I had hoped in that league, and that was probably due to me again being in too many leagues and being like, okay, this one's fine. I don't really have to worry about this one too much. We'll just kind of push that one on the back burner and worry about it later. But yeah, I still think that the draft went well, executed it pretty well, and ended up doing okay in the end. Still would have liked a chip there though. And then I had my 3 dynasty leagues. There was Apples and Geno's Listener Dynasty League. That was the second year of that. Ended up I was in contention for a playoff spot. Knew that I wasn't going to win a championship. I was not in the tier that was going to compete for a championship. There were 2 or 3 really good teams right at the top that were kind of dominating everybody. So I decided to sell and ended up selling Alex Ovechkin, and I believe I sold Mackenzie Weegar as well. I tried to sell high on him. I know when Nate and I talked about selling high in Dynasty, I was a little hesitant on trading Mackenzie Weegar, but that's a guy that I did actually trade. So let's just pull up what I did here, because I do think that last season when I did this season in review, something that I wanted to work on was uh was trading, and I felt like that was a part of my game that I needed to refine. And it I mean, I think in some ways I've improved. I do think I was still a little bit complacent in certain spots. Again, I think partially due to being in too many leagues. I really got to cut back on my redrafts this year. I've been saying that, and then What have I done this offseason? I've joined two new dynasty startups. I joined the Keeping Carlson patron dynasty league. Blake and I are going to co-manage a team in that league. It's a cap league, so that's something that I've never done before. And then I actually joined another cap league with a few guys from the Discord as well. So yeah, so now I'm in 5 dynasty leagues. I was going to to back out of the tidy, which is the fantasy hockey life uh, dynasty league. I ended up placing third in that one. I sold the farm because I felt like I was going to get promoted, and ended up getting third and just missed promotion. So not really set up for great future success. I made trades like Dougie Hamilton. I knew he was out for the season, so I sold him for a discount because I was like, well, I'm getting promoted. I'm moving on, and it didn't end up working out. So yeah, we'll go back to my trades in this league here, the Apples and Genos Dynasty League. So I ended up dealing. Let me see here. I ended up dealing Alex Ovechkin and a third round pick uh, for Jake DeBrusk, Aaron Ekblad, and a first. So I do think that that was pretty decent value for Ovechkin. He was kind of on the tail end of his career. Had a really tough start to the year, and then kind of turned it on. And I thought this is probably my best opportunity to get this done, and that's what I did. Traded Mackenzie Weegar for Sean Dursey, Ty Cartier, and a first round pick. Probably could have got more for Weegar there, but I'm pretty happy getting Dursey on my roster. Also thought I would sell high on Bobby McMahon because I thought that his performance was a flash of the pan. I've changed my tune on that a little bit. I think Bobby McMahon is gonna have a good year next year, but traded him for Philip Masar and a third round pick, which I mean I got a little bit too excited about the way that I felt like Masar looked at the World Juniors last year. So he was flying all over the ice. I traded Anthony Duclair for Brock Nelson as well, straight up, which ended up being absolutely awesome for me. And yeah, we won't dive into it too much, but I did try to be a little bit more active on the trade front, and I think I was successful there. In a couple other leagues, I was in the Dauber Prospects Report, a dynasty league through them. They were Bangers Cats Dynasty League. And that was another one where I was in first to second place the entire year, got a little bit complacent, and then sold the farm to try and win in the end. Got a bunch of older players on my roster, got Eric Carlson, Drew Doughty, uh, and really loaded up. And Joe Pavelski was another guy I acquired, who I'm probably going to have to drop now because I believe he's going to retire. And ended up getting fourth. Lost in the semis and got fourth. And the fourth was I tied my matchup. I tied the third place matchup, and the tiebreaker was regular season record versus each other, and my opponent had beat me in the regular season, so just didn't fall my way. So overall, a bit of a tough year for Josh in the fantasy department. I don't feel amazing about it. I do feel confident going into next year. But a few things that I think that I should work on. One, try not to pull the trigger as early on goalies. Tristan Jarry in round 9 in the couple. I think that was a big mistake. Try to resist those guys in the mid rounds unless they're like a smash home run. I got Thatcher Demko in the 10th round. That was the next earliest that I took a goalie. That ended up working out very well. But Tristan Jarry, I think that was maybe a risk that I didn't need to take in the 9th round. The I mean, the other thing is I need to just dial back my redraft leagues and maybe focus up a little bit more. That it was tough to keep track of that many leagues and try to really compete and really be um, really be aggressively scouring the waiver wire, knowing what's up, knowing what people are doing. It's really hard to do. I mean, I think that uh, um, yeah, I just don't have as much bandwidth as I maybe used to, and I felt like the previous year I was in 6 leagues. I ended up doing pretty well in most of them, and I just felt like, wow, I'm gonna do well in uh no matter how many leagues I'm in. I also feel like this past year I kind of I narrowed things down to a point where I was only in really competitive leagues, so the leagues were just more difficult. Like I'm not in a home league anymore, so there's no leagues where it's like, oh, I'm gonna win this, no problem. It's like everything is very competitive. So I'm trying to gain a leg up, but so is everybody else in some way, shape, or form. The other thing is, in these listener leagues, they're listening to Nate and Blake and me all the time. So that's another element that's difficult. But you know, it's just the way things go. I'm pretty confident going into next year. I'm going to do my own projections. That's something new. I don't think I've said that on the mic yet. That is pretty much official at this point. Um, and I'm hoping that helps. Maybe it completely fucks everything up, and maybe it's maybe I'll regret trusting my instincts that much, but we're gonna give it a go this year. I'm pretty excited about it. So lots of exciting things coming this summer. Blake's got a couple episodes coming out soon, and yeah, we're just going full steam ahead. Free agencies coming up. We're getting we're getting into it. As soon as the Stanley Cup Finals done, the draft is right after it, and then we are right in the midst of, I mean, a fantasy hockey dead zone, but by the time August rolls around, we're gonna be in draft season, baby. I'm so pumped. But that is all I have for today. Please leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you to those who already have. It's helped us a lot with our audience growth. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. I am on YouTube right now by myself. This is my first solo YouTube video. Come check it out. Also, if you like our content, check out the Apples and Genos Patreon to support us on a monthly basis. Hop into the Apples and Genos Discord server as well. We're having lots of discussions about fantasy hockey in there. Shout outs to the band there for providing our music. Their Spotify link is in the episode description. Follow us on X. Nate is at Apples Genos. Blake is at Blake Creamer AG, and I'm at Just Josh and 4-1. Please practice safe stats and happy summer. Have a good one, folks.